Okay, we can start.
সকলোকে প্ৰীতি আৰু শুভেচ্ছা জ্ঞাপন কৰি তেজপুৰ বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ৰ অসমীয়া বিভাগৰ তৰফৰ পৰা আপোনালোক সকলোকে আদৰণি জনাইছো আৰু ইতিমধ্যে আপোনালোক সকলোৱে গম পাইছে যে তেজপুৰ বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ৰ অসমীয়া বিভাগে এটা বক্তৃতা অনুষ্ঠান এলানি বক্তৃতা অনুষ্ঠানৰ আয়োজন কৰি আহিছে আজি সেই বক্তৃতাৰ পঞ্চমটো বক্তৃতা এই বক্তৃতা প্ৰদান কৰিবলৈ আমি আমন্ত্ৰণ কৰি আনিছো IIT দিল্লীৰ অৰ্জুন ঘোষ ডাঙৰীয়াক তেখেতে ডিজিটেল হিউমেনিটিজ এণ্ড লিটাৰেচাৰ শীৰ্ষক বক্তৃতাটো প্ৰদান কৰিব পুনৰবাৰ অসমীয়া বিভাগলৈ আপোনালোক সকলোকে আদৰণি জনাইছো আৰু আজিৰ কাৰ্যসূচী আগবঢ়াই নিবৰ বাবে মই জ্যোতিষ্মান দাসক অনুৰোধ জনাইছো
Okay. Thank you, sir. উপস্থিত সকলোকে মই মোৰ ফালৰ পৰা স্বাগতম জনাইছো ইতিমধ্যে আমি সকলোৱে অৱগত যে আজি আমাৰ বিশেষ বক্তৃতাৰ যি বিষয় ডিজিটেল মানৱিকবিদ্যা আৰু সাহিত্য আৰু এই বিষয়ত বক্তৃতা প্ৰদান কৰিবৰ বাবে আমাৰ মাজত উপস্থিত হৈছে শ্ৰদ্ধাৰ অৰ্জুন ঘোষ ছাৰ I am pleased to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker, Dr. Arjun Ghosh sir. Dr. Ghosh is an associate professor of Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT-Delhi. He has worked in and has interest in the field of digital humanities, performance studies, intellectual property, political communication, etc. He is the author of A History of Janadaitya Mons, Place for the People, and Freedom from Profit, Eschewing Copyright in Resistance Art. He has also translated Bijan Bhattacharya's famous Bengali drama, Nabanno, into English. We are grateful for his presence among us today, and now I would like to request Dr. Ghosh sir to deliver his talk. Sir.
Thank you. Namaskar. I am extremely happy to be presenting my work or talking about digital humanities. I'm sorry, I will talk in English. But I am very happy to be speaking specifically to a Department of Assamese. Particularly because it is an Indian language outside the ambit of Hindi and English. And it is my own view that, an Indian digital humanities should necessarily be only a multilingual digital humanities. Within the history of print in India, we have seen language identity solidifying, and I regard that in post-colonial India, in India after independence, with all the language politics involved, we have lost an historic opportunity to understand each other directly. I am a speaker of Bangla, and I should be able to communicate with the Assamese speaking population, with the Assamese department, the students who are studying Assamese, in either of the two languages, not through English or Hindi. And there are perhaps very few people in India who would have the privilege of doing that. And at the beginning of my talk, I am going to highlight how the era of the digital humanities, the coming of the digital media, actually allows us that possibility of giving it another shot, of actually communicating between languages in India rather than through Hindi or English. I'm going to try and share my screen. if you permit me. Right, please let me know if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Sir. Yeah, it's visible here.
Okay. So I have been asked to talk about digital humanities and literature. But you know, when we talk about digital humanities, we are talking about certain tools in which it is very, very difficult to actually compartmentalize literature. So I might actually spill over to some other areas. But the point I'll be making is about how to work with digital tools in study of literature. I'm going to break up my talk into two parts. The first part I look at digital tools and methods, and the second one I talk about an Indian DH. In between, I'll be taking some questions. So actually, what we need to understand is what does the digital actually, coming of the digital era, actually mean? Now, there was a point of time in history of humankind when we were primarily a rural city, rural civilization, or rural sort of species, agrarian species. And now we are becoming more and more urban, there's population density growing. So in let us say, up to the early modern period, human population is extremely rarified, and therefore communication was marked by distance. Today we talk about social distancing, which was perhaps quite natural in the pre-modern period. Though epidemics did happen there as well, but they did not have the kind of effect that a COVID can have. And this was the era of manuscript culture. And if we look at the history of human communication, we can divide it into several periods, and that is the oral, manuscript culture, then print culture, and then you have the coming of the digital, right? And each of them are mediated by the change of certain technologies. Manuscript requires, the first time human beings learned how to use a stylus, a pen, all right, something to write on, let's say paper or a scroll. And these are technologies, these are development of technologies. In the oral, it's only the body that is being used, the performative. Then you have the invention of the printing machine, which sort of transforms and makes available many more books, right? So in the oral, you understand that when I am speaking, I have to be present there. If you want to know my knowledge, I have to be present there. Whereas in the manuscript, I can write something on a piece of paper or something, and that piece of paper can travel beyond me. But I can write, or anybody can write, only a finite number of copies of a particular manuscript. There will be only few copies of that manuscript. So imagine a medieval library would have only maybe a few books. And that would be a very great collection. Whereas after the invention of printing, there were multiple sorts of books which became possible. And that sort of increased the expanse of learning, And that expanse of learning meant that a library would have a lot more variety of knowledge. And that sort of made it possible. I hope everybody can see my screen, because I would be sharing my screen throughout my lecture. And I have had incidents in the past where using Google Meet, people were not able to see my screen. And they didn't even, because I can't see myself. I don't.
Your screen is visible.
Yes, please, at any point of time, if there is a problem, do warn me, because I always use my screen to when I speak.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sir.
Yes. So this led to the rise of science and rationality, because you could test out various phenomena against each other because you had access to so much more knowledge without the presence of the knower or the person who is giving the knowledge. And you see a kind of scientific project in present day with the CERN Large. This is a picture of the CERN Large Hadron Collider, which brings scientists from across. It's more collaborative kind of project, right? Many scientists from across the world come together, and scientific papers, journals could have so many co-authored papers. I mean, all papers are co-authored. Some of them could have scores of co-authors. And however, in the literary studies, these methods have remained still quite similar, that we sit in like individual cubicles and read. This is very much similar to medieval libraries, where people would have specific cubicles in which they would be reading aloud, because that's the only way they could read in those days. Reading silently was a later innovation. So, but all these the methods of scientific research are now catching up with the humanities and with the literature, and that is what we are going to see, this use of these kind of tools of research, where you are able to collaborate across disciplines. That is something, which is why I say that when you talk about digital humanities, you actually necessarily talk about interdisciplinary research. So that thing about the effectiveness of digital humanities in literature is important, but also somewhat limited, because a digital humanities in literature would be possible only when you collaborate with colleagues from other disciplines of not only the humanities and social sciences, but in the sciences as well. All right. I hope it will become clear in the course of my lecture. Now, what I want to sort of, and you see on the screen now, a particular example of a particular tool that we can use to look through books. Now, what you see on the screen is a particular tool, and all of you can sort of try it out. It's the Google Engram viewer. And in the Google Engram viewer, I can put in a couple of words, and Google Books has lots of books, right? It searches through all these books across centuries. So you have here from 1800 to 2019, and searches out the incidences of the words democracy and dictatorship, right? And Google takes only a fraction of a second to conduct this research, where the human eye can only look at this in a human being, a very well-read human being. Take a guess how many books they can read in their lifetime. Google is reading millions of books and telling you what is the incidence of democracy and dictatorship in across, let's say, more than 2 centuries of books. Now, this is similar kind of technologies which are used by astronomers, or for example, to develop the vaccine for COVID. It's computational method where you actually can run through millions and millions of combinations of the vaccine to see which one could be more effective, and then pick up for clinical trial only those which show promise in computational sort of demonstration. So now let me ask you a question. Now you see here the word democracy, and there are 2 blips, 2 peaks. Can anybody take me through? And there is a 3rd peak which is right about now. Can anybody tell me why are these peaks at that point of time? Is there a conclusion that we can draw? Sorry, I asked a question. If anybody wants to answer, you can unmute and answer. take a guess. No, nobody wants to attempt. Okay, so it's clearly these peaks.
Is it possible for you to zoom in?
I'll try.
Because the dates are not clearly visible, but I think it's around 1940, is it?
Yeah, I'll just try to do this. Yeah, can you see now?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Yes. So this is the peak is 41 and right? I think it is quite apparent.
Yeah. These are the periods of the First and Second World War.
Yes, absolutely. So now you see this allows you to read the anxiety in those who are writing about the future of democracy during a period of crisis, right? So immediately you see you can, using this kind of a tool, you can read some kind of interpretation. And if you are more sophisticated, you can look at smaller and smaller corpus and sort of pry out certain incidences, certain books, which you might want to read closely. So typically what happens is that we in literature, we are trained to closely read texts, but these tools enable us to read extensively, have distance reading, right? So read a lot of texts computationally, and then prepare ourselves for close reading of those texts that the computational research throws out. Now this theme of where the digital media actually sort of marks a significant shift in history of human communication. I'm trying to tell you that the coming of the digital media is not merely a case of one more medium that is there, that from print to film and radio and television and then to digital. That is not what it is. The digital is very markedly different from other communication technologies which are mechanical. The digital is, and that has implications on human life and society and politics tremendously. We know that the coming of print made a huge change in the way human society was organized. It is linked to the coming of capitalism, to the coming of colonialism, nationalism, and democracy in many sorts of ways. So there are many questions that come up, and we do not have much space here to discuss that. This course, which is available on the SWAYAM NPTEL platform, is I have dealt with this question there. Anybody who's interested can look up the lectures. Coming to digital humanities for the moment. Well, digital humanities has different streams. So the one is archiving and digitization, and there's digital literatures, and there's digital pedagogy, using digital tools to teach, which we are probably doing right now. Then there is computational humanities. All right. In archiving and digitization, basically you move artifacts, you take documents from their material form and transform them into a digitized form. Now, there are multiple issues involved in it. I mean, one says that digitization is probably necessary for preservation, but one may be, it may not actually be true, because digital formats become obsolete much quicker than material formats. If you take some certain rare manuscripts which are 1,000 years old, you still can read it pretty much the same way it was used 1,000 years back. But imagine today you cannot read a CD that you used to listen to, let us say a few years back. because that technology has disappeared from your devices altogether. So formats become obsolete and there are new versions of software. So any case, be that as it may, one of the most important significant digitization efforts have been undertaken by the School of Cultural Texts and Records at Tezpur University, who created this online barorium of Tagore's works, Vichitra. It's also partnered with the Endangered Archives program of the British Library. You may want to look up, and there are lots of digitized texts up on the Endangered Archives program. And we also have the National Digital Library of India. Certain efforts are being made on this front. And I believe your department has also made some significant contribution to this field. Electronic literatures is a way of using these electronic tools to tell stories. So, this is, for want of time, I will not play the video, but the link is there. Since this is being recorded, you can take a look at this. This is a cave, electronic cave, created by Noah Wardle-Fruin, where the viewer actually gets inside these text-created cave, which is it's projected on, but it's also interactive. You can touch the words and can move the position of the words, and at the end, these words sort of mix and match and create new sets of texts. So it's much greater. Whereas a book is sort of stable, the digital text enables a certain degree of interactiveness and variability. Unfortunately, in India, we do not have many cases of digital literatures. The very few which are there are in the form of video games, which also are ways of storytelling. Right? And however, I'm not concentrating in today's lecture on electronic literatures. Some of you who may have watched Bandersnatch on Netflix would see that there are these stories which are told, which where the viewer is presented with a choice, and then the narrative takes that particular direction, and so it's the viewer who sort of decides exactly the kind of the trajectory a particular narrative takes, unlike in print, where the trajectory is fixed by the fact that a printed volume is actually sewn up at the spine, and the texts have to move from one direction to another, and that's the way it can be read. However, even within that, you can see here on the slide that there are certain mappings which have been made by the authors of this particular narrative, and so the variations that the viewer can undertake are finite and not infinite. All right. If you want your students to sort of try to tell stories interactively, one can use this free tool called Twine to sort of create these tools. I have tried to sort of create one particular version of this tool in the very simple game called Hare and the Tortoise, where the viewer gets a choice as to what they want to be, whether they want to be the hare or the tortoise. So the hare comes in, and the hare says that he decides to taunt the tortoise to a game, and the tortoise challenges him to a race, and he accepts the challenge. Then they both run, and he finds that and it calculates the time. He finds that the tortoise is not there, so he decides to take a nap. Then he gets up and he says the tortoise is not there, so he keeps on sleeping. Then he has a choice whether to go back to sleep or to run. So he decides to go back to sleep, but then he finds that the tortoise has already won the winner, and they're coming back from the good. So this is a way, and you can restart and you can play as the tortoise instead. So this is a way in which this is a very simple example of how, and you can how electronic literatures can be interactive, and that could be an interesting way of students to study narratives. And this is an online open source tool, and it can work in any language. You can tell Assamese stories using this tool as much as English or any other language. There are other sorts of tools to present research, to create timelines. So this is a tool called Night Lab by Night Labs. For want of time, I'm not demonstrating it. There are also these ArcGIS tools which allow you to trace the movement of a narrative from one place to another. We can do workshops on how to use some of these tools, but maybe, and they are pretty easy to use. You can try it out yourself. If you get stuck, you can use some tutorials which may be available on YouTube, and they can be very productive in sort of in presenting one's work in an interactive fashion and presenting things, ideas visually. Now I get into the question of computation. So now many of the tools that are used for computational humanities have emerged from the fields of cybersecurity or marketing and analytics, where they try to figure from huge pools of data, try to pool in those particular cases which need greater investigation, or in the case of marketing, greater investment. And that is what we could do. We saw with a simple tool like Google Engram Viewer. There are lots of tools which are available for us to use, which have been created by researchers across the world. So one of these tools is created by Stanford University, is called Palladio. So on Palladio, you can create network graphs. For example, here are cases of the letters written to or from Galileo, and it tells us who are the people that he corresponded with and what were their professions. So what was his circle like? It sort of presents, and these are many letters, and when reading each of the letters, we do not get this kind of a sense. But a visual presentation sort of helps us summarize the data in a very objective sort of way, and it can sometimes overturn certain conclusions that scholars have had hitherto. So one can check also kind of a moving timeline of Galileo's correspondence network, and also see how he shifted from which part of Italy to which part of Italy his correspondences, people whom he collaborated with or talked to, corresponded with, sort of changed over time, whether there were any shifts in his approaches towards his life, towards his thought processes. And this sort of allows you to get this giant overview, which the human eye is literally incapable of dealing with. There are other sorts of possibilities with Palladio. The network graph, this is a network graph, and let me tell you, when we're talking about the use of words, we are talking about the use of words across platforms which are digital. So you understand, in social media, if anybody wants to research on social media, it is not possible to use close reading techniques, because there is such a lot of, there are millions and millions of tweets, huge amounts of Facebook posts or Instagram posts, and it would be impossible to read all that. And if you're reading only a small sample of it, then the conclusions that you have will be sort of contingent, will be suspect. So therefore, one needs to sort of zero down on specific text, and this sort of is a network graph which tells us the kind of people, the kind of topics which go along with in a conversation about the Israel-Palestine conflict. Or this is a network graph that I created using this tool called Gephi, which is again an open source, freely available tool, of Wikipedia pages on Indian history, and I try to see whether there are groups of editors. You know, Wikipedia pages are edited by specific people, and by lots of people, not all the users of it. Or whether same kind of people are, same sets of people are editing similar kinds of pages, and that sort of gives us whether there's some motivation in editing these particular pages. So I sort of create this kind of a network graph to be able to look at these relationships. One can create network graphs for particular characters in the works of a particular author. Now I talked about some of these online tools, but these online tools only give you a certain degree of measurability. Really, at the back end, there's a lot of code that is working. But if you want to sort of zero in, if you want to sort of particularize your question, you really need, more advanced usages really need to understand some of these programming languages. And the two important languages to learn are R and Python. I'm saying this not to scare anybody. Typically in India, humanities and social science scholars, it's a stream which is far away from programming. But one of the answers is collaboration. The second answer is very simple, that this is like any other language. I'm sure if I try it for a few years or a few months, I can pick up some rudimentary Assamese as well. And similarly, I think learning a language like Python is much easier. Within a few weeks, someone can pick it up. So I think in future, if digital humanities is to take root in India, this will the learning of basic tools in some of these languages will become an important part of the curriculum, and they're not at all difficult. There are lots of online courses and everything. There are students who pick it up on their own. So it's not at all very difficult. Anyway, so let us look at some literary texts. I'll just rush through some of these examples. If there is a workshop, we can actually work on some of these problems. We can see here kind of combinations of certain characters in Jane Austen's novels. Which are the characters which always occur together within certain bunches of texts, right? So who are they? So what are the honorifics that are used? So for example, Sir William or Lady Middleton. So you can see what kind of and this is a technique called using bigraphs, that is groups of 2 words. You can also group 3 words together and do various interesting sort of conceptualization and visualization, and you can figure them out together. And then this is also another sort of tool like topic modeling, where you find the most used bigrams in Jane Austen's novels, and you see which are the characters that are talked about the most in a particular novel, right? So here is a way of looking through lots of journals in history and literature and figuring out which are the common terms between history and literature. This is a good tool to use to find out areas of collaboration, for example. And here they look through literally thousands of journal articles, put them into the algorithm, and the algorithm sort of throws up this particular kind of network. Now, topic modeling has also been used to identify topics and speeches in speeches or other texts. Here is an example of how to look through certain speeches made in the European Parliament over maybe a decade, and figure out which are the topics that the Parliament spends most amount of time with. There are many other sophisticated techniques that could be used to sort of figure this out. Then you can also use things like sentiment analysis, where you can analyze sentiment words to figure out what are the kinds of sentiments that are characteristic of a particular work, and then this particular work tries to try to figure out what are the kind of novels which become bestsellers, right? And then there is stylometry, through which you can try to identify whether a particular person has written a particular work and try to create a sense of who is the author of a particular anonymous work. Here is a sentiment example of sentiment analysis where someone tried to figure out the emotions used in tweets by Donald Trump. So as you can see, the most predominant sort of emotion here in Trump's tweets is that of sadness. Quite surprising though. This is also another visualization technique to use these kind of emotions to figure out where is the average of his tweets and what kind of sentiment. So positive sentiment versus negative sentiment. So you find that his average is by and large positive. You wouldn't think of that. It goes against, beats the conventional understanding. But if you look at, and the reason why this happens is because you highlight certain tweets which you find interesting and you highlight them. But if you look at the entire body of tweets, it will probably give you a different picture. So I think in the future of literature, one would be looking at a kind of a balance between both these methods. All right, I will sort of skip a little bit to talk about a particular work of mine where I look at the Wikipedia pages of Shivaji and Padmini, and these, and you know, these are in popular imagination. This is a kind of looked upon as a clash of civilizations, of the good guy versus the bad guy, and of course you know who the bad guy is, and therefore this particular sense of who was the traitor, whether Shivaji was the traitor or whether Afzal Khan was the traitor, is sort of at the fulcrum of this kind of a presentation of character. And we see that moving into the popular domain where then Afzal Khan is referred to as a hardcore terrorist. But if you look at Wikipedia, you see that that at the end of the day, there are these two people in the tent, and one of them was victorious, came out alive, the other person lay dead in the tent. How can there be an objective history of it if you think of it the historical method? And Wikipedia is one of the sources which says that accounts vary. So therefore, it is not getting into this debate of who was right or who was wrong. It just looks at the historical research and sort of beats common sense, because Wikipedia is sort of edited by any and everybody. And this is true also of Padmini. It says, although the legend of Padmini is best known story about the siege, it has little historical basis. Now, so for Wikipedia, which is edited, anybody can go in, even without a login and edit, you would think it is all false. But Wikipedia is a lot more credible source. You find, how do you figure out that, you know, what you see here is a credible page, but inside each of these pages, there are many edited pages. You can go back in history, and let's say a page like Shivaji now has maybe 10,000 edits, and a page like Padmini may have about 1,500 to 2,000 edits. It is impossible for the human eye to go inside this entire archive of edited pages and figure out when somebody tried to put something in and somebody tried to take it out, what kind of a edit war took place, you know. So so I use this technique of engrams to sort of figure out where is it. So this graph sort of gives you a sense of when a certain word rises in use and then someone else comes and deletes it out, and you can figure out, and across 10 years I can see exactly when this particular war, sort of edit war, this battle sort of on Wikipedia happened over this word Chhatrapati, or in the case of Rani Padmini, the word called Jawhar. You can see it, the word coming into the page and then someone deleting and then other person putting it back. And this blip you can see here, this constant sort of back and forth around the point of time 2017-18 when the film Padmavat was getting made. So Now, it is impossible for the human eye to actually read through all the edited pages and spot the changes. But the computational technique allows us to do it very, very quickly. And then we can go and read the specific edit pages and figure it out for ourselves. Anyway, I will. There's more I can talk about, but I think I will take a set of questions right now before proceeding with the rest of the lecture. Can we have some questions before I proceed with the rest of the lecture?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions immediately, because you know, on the online medium it is very difficult to speak for very long. People are not able to retain attention. So I rather give a break and take some questions and then go back. So if you have any at this stage, even clarificatory questions, simple doubts, you can just come up, some things that are occurring in your mind. You can also share your opinion on what I've talked about.
Thank you, sir. I am Sandeep Deka from the Department of Assamese, Tezpur University. So, thank you for your enlightening lecture. Am I audible, sir?
So, Sanjeev, I must say my lecture isn't over yet. I still have a few more slides to share.
Yes.
Wanting to take a few questions in the middle.
Yeah.
So if anybody has a question, then you can sort of quickly unmute yourself and quickly ask. I'll give it another 30 seconds and then we will try to go back and finish the lecture. No? Okay, let me continue. Is that okay? President York, should I continue? Or is there a question anybody has wants to ask? No? Okay. Right, I will right. So now I'm going to talk about the challenges for challenges in the Indian DH. Now, what I want to, some of you may be aware of this particular tool called Voyant. And here, one of the examples that you get on Voyant is an analysis of the works of Shakespeare. This particular tool called Voyant is very, very effective for students of literature, and it takes that entire corpus of Shakespeare's works and sort of analyzes it in multiple sorts of ways. So what you have here, I'll sort of try to show them one by one. This is kind of a dashboard in which there are many kinds of analysis, and here you see that you can check out specific terms and their rise and fall through the corpus, and underneath you have the names, at the bottom you have the names of titles of particular plays by Shakespeare, particular works by Shakespeare, and you can see which are some of the words that rise and fall. All right, and that can give you a sense of what are the particular emphasis in specific works. You also get a kind of a summary sheet here at the bottom of this dashboard, and you can expand any of these specific terms, and this is too small, but it gives you which is the longest straight away, which is the longest of these documents, and that is Hamlet. And then it sort of gives you the number of characters in it, and it sort of gives you that list, and you can expand that list if you want. Which one has the largest number of words? Words as in the density of words, that is how many new words are being used in that. How many words are being used specifically in that, unique words being used. Or you can get which are the, you can make another linguistic analysis, the average words per sentence, which of the plays are most wordy, and you see Richard II is most wordy. You also get a specific sense of what are the distinctive words, that's the unique words, and the number of usages compared to the rest of the corpus, and that is here you get that sense. So specifically here you can see that mostly you get these proper nouns, and though you will identify the specific characters, but you can also sort of do other kinds of things with this, right? And I want to specifically just show you, there are many other ways you can see the rise and fall of specific words through a particular play, and see how a particular word becomes more important in the course of that particular play, right? So you can see scene-wise how it happens. If you divide the corpus up like that, and if you can in a novel you can check out various chapters, which are the characters which become important towards the end of the novel, whether there are any kind of trends. There are many kinds of analysis that become possible. But this is a very simple tool, which is word cloud, which sort of gives you a snapshot of which are the important words in Shakespeare's works, and you can easily sort of use this tool to increase the total number of words that you want to project, and get a sense of what are the important emphasis, what are the important topics that are being used. Now, from this, I want to move on to another example of Voyant, and something that I did. I just took Rabindranath Tagore's Ghare Baire, and I sort of tried to project it. And this is what I got. Now, if we go, and it works pretty fine, only that it is not as effective. Because if you look at, if any of you understand Bangla, I think the letters are quite similar to that in Assamese. If you look at the words, these words are not very meaningful words compared to, let us say, what we have for Shakespeare. Because in the English corpus, this particular tool is sort of trained to sort of subtract from the corpus words which are called stop words, right? Like and, is, because, right? Which occur quite frequently in language. Now, the Voyant tool is not trained to remove those stop words, and it is those stop words which are showing up in my word cloud. Now, clearly, this tool is not able to, so this is the pitfall of using some of these tools for research in the Indian languages, because you need to have specific tools for the Indian languages. Identify stop words, identify words related to specific kinds of sentiment. You know, words are contextual. A certain word used in a European context is very different from the same word which may be used in a South Asian context. And to do a sentiment analysis on a tool that is developed in an European context to read text within a South Asian context would sort of give us results which are scholarly, not sound. So we need to create our own tools. That's point number one. The second point is about the availability of archives. So you see here is a particular archive, online archive of Australian newspapers put together by the National Library of Australia. And they have lots and lots of these of their newspapers which are available online, and they are actually available as digitized text. They have been put through an OCR, which is optical character reader. And then you have the researcher Professor Catherine Board from the Australian National University, who actually looked through this entire corpus of the newspapers to discover that there were lots and lots of fiction of Australian authors which nobody ever knew of. I'm sure if anybody had an archive of that kind, which one can run a computational analysis through, then it would produce a certain kind of result about Indian authors, which we neither do a story which we do not know, authors in various Indian languages. But that is, so imagine if you're wanting to look through some past 100-year-old newspaper, you would be lucky if there are certain newspapers which will open their archive to you, and then to hunt out one particular story, you may have to. They are not dynamically searchable like Google Books, or the internet is dynamically searchable. But here you'll have to look through pages and pages to find out that one article, if you're lucky to be paying attention. One of the ways in which these online texts have been created, the digitized texts have been created in Vichitra, which is the Tezpur University tool, is that it was hand transcribed, right? And that's an extremely tedious, and it could be well funded, and human labor is extremely expensive. So that makes that task extremely difficult. Right, so handwriting text recognition and OCR is something that needs to be developed at a very usable level. There are some OCR engines for some of the Indian languages, but they are not necessarily very good for all the Indian languages, and certainly not for handwriting records. So that's something that needs to be developed. So, and once the text that comes in, there are various kinds of techniques that can be used to analyze those texts. One is the text encoding initiative. I can see in your proposed syllabus, there is this point about text encoding, where the text is encoded, specific texts are encoded to tell people which is a place, which is a name, and other sorts of things. There are other also sophisticated natural language processing tools like named entity recognition, where one can identify proper nouns. Now, European languages, proper nouns are mostly capitalized, and so therefore probably easier to discover. But we need to figure out ways of doing that for the Indian languages. And there's also a case of parts of speech, whether you can check out which are the various parts of speech or figures of speech. And also recognize place names to figure out, okay, I want to locate all novels written in Assamese which have a setting in Tinsukia. How will you do that? With computational techniques, it would be possible to run through the entire corpus and tell you, okay, these are the novels probably you want to look at, or you want to look at think of a particular event in history around whom you, or a particular figure in history who is the reference in the literature, and that would be possible. But for all that, you need OCR, optical character recognition, or handwriting text recognition, where non-digitized texts are, and then they are scanned and they are brought in as digitized text, and there could be multiple applications through it. So there's be scanned and then created. Now, one point that I want to warn is that many of these texts could be copyrighted. So just digitizing them, then scanning them, putting them online could sometimes be could require certain permissions, and any such project should have the requisite legal permissions, so that you don't land up in a sort of a legal battle. And I want to end by this talking about the specific project that me and my colleague Chetan Arora from Computer Science and Engineering have now taken up, is this to develop optical character and handwriting text recognition for Indian languages. Why is this important? Is that it will enable us to have texts, so anyway, image texts, if you want to put them online. They're very heavy files, right? And would require large server spaces and a lot of bandwidth. Whereas this digitized text, machine-readable text, is something that is easy to store. You can store an entire book within a few kilobytes, whereas if you have scanned images, you might require many, many hundreds of megabytes to be able to store it, and that's expensive. And it also enables this deep search. You can go inside the text and search. Otherwise, all you will left to search with is by the title or by the author, and maybe some subject keywords. But a deep search allows for much, much better digital research. And most importantly, those of scholars in India or other such countries who sort of take to digital humanities, they are left with texts which are already have a digital life, right? And that sort of takes them back to texts in the European languages, particularly in English in India. And we're going back to that era where we are giving greater importance to European texts rather than the texts, South Asian texts or post-colonial texts. And that is sort of going to lead to a resurgence of what Rupika Risham calls the digital afterlife of colonialism. So you understand, by about the 1980s, till about the 1980s, most English literature syllabi in India were restricted to British literature. Then they expanded and included some American texts, and much, much later they started including Indian texts. Now we're going back the clock some 40 years, where because there are no machine-readable Indian texts, we, in our digital humanities classroom, it's not that digital humanities is really taken off in India, but once it does, there will be this dearth of availability of texts in Indian languages, and that is something that we need to plan for. And that's exactly what this particular project of ours seeks to do, is to contest this Western dominance of the digital humanities. Because if you have to have an Indian DH and necessarily a multilingual DH, where we are able to converse with each other, it is possible today that you put in a text in Malayalam into the machine, a page of Malayalam into the machine, and it sort of gives the output in Assamese. It is something that we should work on, and we should do this machine translation and machine reading. And so then we become closer to each other in our cultures. And it will also enable us to ask distant reading questions, right? And of course, I'm extremely happy to note that, your department has actually these old Assamese manuscripts which are already digitized. And right now within this project, we are trying to develop, we're taking one language at a time. The first language that we have now taken up is that of Urdu. But it would be interesting to work on Assamese as well once that part of the project is over. So thank you. I think I can stop sort of sharing my screen, and maybe now you can ask me some questions.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for your enlightening and valuable talk on digital humanities and literature. We are grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts. আমি আপোনাক আমাৰ তৰফৰ পৰা বহুত ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ, আৰু এতিয়া মই উপস্থিত যিসকল অংশগ্ৰহণকাৰী আছে তেওঁলোকক ছাৰৰ প্ৰতি থকা প্ৰশ্নসমূহ সুধিবৰ কাৰণে অনুৰোধ জনাইছোঁ. You can ask your question now. যদি কিবা প্ৰশ্ন আছে ছাৰৰ প্ৰতি তেতিয়াহ'লে মই সুধিবলৈ অনুৰোধ জনাইছোঁ।
I have a very simple question, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so what are the basic steps to have some Periorum edition, like Visitra, the Periorum edition of Rabindranath Tagore and Periorum edition of Shankaradeva previous text. So, sir, what are the basic steps?
Can you elaborate what do you mean by basic stage?
So, in the beginning of the study, we have some conventional way of having some physical text critical study. So, in digital medium, how can we proceed to have the Periorum edition of Shankaradev's various texts? We do not know.
So, I think there are many stages within the workflow. First is that of scanning the images. I think that's a stage that you've already undertaken. But what is important is one needs to also be careful while scanning. I do not know exactly how you have scanned them, because you see, while scanning them, we should take a great degree of caution to ensure that we gather within that information of the scan as much information about the material as possible. That's why the preparation of the metadata is very important for each scanned image. And one of the ways, one is to figure out where it was found from, what is the source, what is the subject, etc., so that metadata is there. The other thing that is done is also you need to have a color checker to ensure, because you see, whenever you take images, the images may not. So if let us say I'm holding up this particular book, this might have a certain color, but on your computer screen, it is appearing as a different color. So in the latest scholarship, the color of the paper or the color of the ink could also become very, very important in telling that story about how they were written. There's this entire field of study called book history, where we understand how texts were written to understand what was written. So therefore, you need to have these precautions in the process of the digitization. Of course, I'm also talking about. I should also highlight the fact that when the digital scanning is taking place, one needs to be extremely ethical and careful not to sort of present to cause as little damage to the original as possible. So therefore, the scanning should be done with an overhead scanner and other kinds of things. Because sometimes in certain cases, these books, these manuscripts would be put in rare manuscripts collection and would not be let out for researchers to read, and they were being brought out only for the scanning. And it could also be that the last time that text could be read, because it can damage in the process. So the responsibility of the digitizer is extreme, or the team is very, very important. The next stage, of course, now the scanned record has to be backed up and kept separately. The images have to be kept very carefully. And after that, you can put them through the OCR. Now we are at a stage in India where the OCR engines themselves have to be developed. Now we still don't have software that provides very accurate. Certainly there is software that does OCR, but they are not very accurate. So you can go through the OCR route. The other route, of course, is there are many ways to produce digitized texts. A is, as I said, OCR, and if you do OCR, handwriting text recognition, then you will produce hopefully a text which is 90 to 95% correct, and after that it needs to be further edited and corrected, the lesser amount of error in the machine reading, the quicker, the easier the task of further editing. The other way in which, let's say, Tezpur University worked is that they employed people who actually physically sort of transcribed, typed out in the Bangla text of Tagore's works, reading the handwriting. Now that is a labor-intensive process. That also produces errors. You know, typing is not error-free. It requires proofreading and everything. There's a third technique that was used, for example, for the Jeremy Bentham Papers project in University College London, where they took the Bentham Papers and put the scanned images online. And there were groups of, very much like Wikipedia, groups of volunteers who would sit down and type it, and through multiple layers of corrections, then our text reaches a certain level of acceptability, and then it is declared to be digitized text. So I see is a combination of this. If you have a good OCR machine, that sort of takes care of not only the works of Sri Shankardev, but also the works of so many other writers and authors. And then users can be on voluntary basis. They can make those small corrections in the OCR result, and then that through a particular web. So the web designing, the platform needs to be one that is dynamic, which allows the users to sort of make corrections into, and there has to be a set of administration and others which are set up. It's very different from the way Tezpur University worked. Their entire digitization work was completed offline, and then they were put online. But they had a budget. Everybody may not have that budget, so we need OCR and we need volunteer contribution.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
আৰু যদি কোৱেশ্যন আছে সুধিব পাৰে।
কুৱেশ্যন আছে যদি সুধিব পৰা, নহ'লে লিখি দিলেও হ'ব। তোমালোকে চাট বক্সত লিখি পেলাই সুধিব পাৰিবা ছাৰক। আমাৰ ষ্টুডেণ্টৰ কাৰোবাৰ কুৱেশ্যন আছে নেকি? নাই যদি ডিছকাউণ্ট ঠিক কৰিব পাৰিবা।
Sir, no more questions, sir. আমি আমাৰ অনুষ্ঠানৰ একেবাৰে শেষৰ ফালে আহি উপনীত হৈছোহি মুহূৰ্তত। I want to thank Dr. Arjun Ghosh sir again for his valuable speech and introduction. And I would like to thank our faculty members, beloved students, and all present here. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. আমি আজি বক্তৃতা অনুষ্ঠানৰ সামৰণি মাৰিছোঁ।
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to have spoken to you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.